person. I did it at the beginning. Times have changed. So, hello and welcome to self-love and accepting the unacceptable. I'm so pleased to see you all here because you can help me solve my own problems around self-love and accepting parts of myself that I find unacceptable. It's just a cheeky way of determining a supervision subject. So, I would love to start in the usual way. Would you mind? Can we do that? Yes? No? The thing about self-love is there's so much we can say about it, and I don't know which part you're interested in. So it's much better if we just break up into little groups and decide what part we want to explore today. You cool? Groovy. So 14. Right. So what I'm going to do is put you into groups. I think we'll do about 3 people a group, 2 to 3. Would that work? Then you've got time to kind of get to know each other as well. Okay. So I'm telling the machine to assign automatically. So you can't be selecting your bestest friends. Kate, I didn't welcome you in from Ho Chi Minh. We haven't seen you for a while. Welcome. Alrighty. I'm too busy playing with buttons here. So, are you ready to roll? Your brief is, what part of self-love or the subject of self-love are you interested in? How to do it? What it looks like when it's not in place? How it affects people's behavior? What you think about a lot of self-love videos or how-to-dos that you see online, or maybe even why self-love has become such a big issue recently. I don't know if you've noticed the books and the clips and the thises and thatses that have come out. It's up to you to decide what part you want to explore. So I'm going to give you 22 minutes and call you back at 1:30. You cool? Alrighty, bye.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome back.
Thank you. I've got a cat and a dog needing me. Sit down. Yeah, sit down.
Is that you, Sarah Ann, with that cat and dog?
Yes.
Sweet.
Sure.
Okay. So how was that? Just sort of broadly, how was the discussion? Was it easy to find an access point? Was it a simple discussion? What happened?
I'll go if no one else is jumping in. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Hit it.
Yeah, for us, it was very easy to find an access point, and we started talking about it straight away. So the first thing that we spoke about was a kind of shared disavowal of what we call the kitschy version. We didn't go too much into what that is because we had a kind of implicit understanding. And then we started speaking about the opposite, and that being shame and toxic shame, and tracking it in ourselves and trying to get to the roots of it, speaking about trying to understand the triggers within ourselves where we become either overwhelmed or subtly affected by a kind of toxic shame arising in ourselves, and getting better with age and with the inner work of being able to discern those triggers for shame and being able to notice self-shaming language, self-shaming, inner critic, and getting better at navigating that aspect of one's inner life. Pete spoke about our changing relationship with shame. So it doesn't necessarily go away. We were talking right at the end about the linkage between overcoming shame and adult ego maturity and that journey, and hypothesizing that as one matures, one's relationship to shame changes and that you get to be with it in a different way. So yeah, we had a very, very rich discussion about shame. I'm dealing with the question of toxic shame on my complex trauma course. So that's been a big part of that. So yeah.
Excellent. It's such a big subject. It's so vast. And it sits under so many behaviors. I can almost see it in every coaching session at the base of choices. But it's a bit too much to kind of go straight in there in the beginning. Thank you. Anybody want to comment on that?
So I think for us, one of the things that we noted is that self-love is not constant. It's transient. And I think that, as Ingrid was saying, yeah, perhaps with maturity, we navigate the comings and goings of it a little more consciously. It doesn't guarantee that we don't hit another shit shame storm. And yeah, that different things help us to equalize back into a place of self-love. And sometimes that's taking it out, whatever it is that's been going on inside of us, to take it outside of us, to be able to look at it, whether that's through a creative or therapy or friends or other people who hold love for us when we're not able to.
I like the idea of it not being constant. Just that's my experience. Anybody want to comment on that? I mean, I don't want to dominate the show.
Julia, if I may. Yeah, so just to continue with self-love is not constant. So two things that came up for us, or the two questions, like, what is the obstacles in the way of self-love? But then also exactly what is this experience, because it is fleeting, because at times, we experience it, at times not. So, what is it? Is it a state of mind? Is it a state of being? Is it a feeling? Just from a point of curiosity, what is this experience? And then also, and what I also found for all of us was, in terms of, so what is the obstacle in the way of this, is that the more we are in our personality types, so for those who are familiar with the Enneagram, the more we are strongly in that Enneagram pattern, for myself as a 2, so the more I'm after the, people liking me and being happy and appreciative and trying to please everyone, the more elusive self-love is. It's just never there. But the more I can practice contentment, and I can not having to identify with my pattern and actually not chasing love or anything, then almost there's automatically a kind of a sense of self-love. And so how there's a sense of self created on the one hand, the more in the personality type, the more elusive self-love is. But then also in the context of our personality types, also in relation to society, there are so many pressures, so many areas of comparison, and the more engaged in social media in terms of comparing myself as inferior, not good enough, it also plays out. So there's something of self-created and also this collective thing, which makes the cycle play out all the time. And I think it's just all the more difficult in these days, and it needs all the more discipline to actually say, okay, what is important? What does self-love and self-compassion mean?
Yeah, such interesting points there. I mean, the one that strikes me is discipline. Did anybody else talk about the discipline of self-love? No, I just know in myself, I mean, working with the definition of self-love as a way to hold myself, not exempt me from my faults or make things nice, but a way to hold myself that is supportive. And I just find my monkey mind trips into patterns that are not useful. So patterns of criticism, patterns of deprecation, patterns of not, missing critical information where I'm good. And it seems to me that it's a discipline. It's a discipline to keep this thing kind of going. It's not a woolly kind of hippie love thing. It's like a hard discipline. It's like making yourself exercise. Well, that's how I feel.
So I think that is the most difficult, to hold that space for yourself. Or in terms of my life, it's the most difficult to hold that space for myself when I feel, I'm not worthy of love right now. And then that takes massive, discipline and inner spaciousness.
Yeah. And the quote that was on there from Tillich, accepting the unacceptable, loving the unlovable, that kind of sort of leads on from what you were saying, Renee. Like, what happens? How do we come back to self-love when we seem to want to escape it all the time for some reason, which is difficult to understand? We can use the discipline thing, perhaps. Anybody got any comments on that? How do we actually get ourselves to love ourselves when we're unlovable, or accept ourselves when we're unacceptable? Anybody want to share some strategies of what they do with themselves? Sabine?
I'm currently reading a book from Sari Gilman, Transform Your Boundaries. And it's a very practical guide, like what are boundaries and how to have them and do them. And I think it very much ties into the practice side of how to practice self-love and how important it is to not have it be very abstract, because that even makes it more shaming sometimes to feel like I want to have self-love, but it's so elusive. I suck again. So how important it is to make that translation into actual hours in your week and your day where you devote time to that kind of quality, but at the same time, speaking from a personal experience, to not overdo it again, because then it becomes kind of a whip, saying, I didn't go to yoga 5 times this week. How terrible am I? So to keep track of this very subtle difference in when you're sliding too much over to the side of when you go into patterns of harsh criticism and perfectionism and all of that. But I think the gateway of looking at it as a practice is absolutely so helpful, and to kind of keep track of your diary. Am I devoting time to myself in that way?
Cool. Thank you for that. Lovely. That practice. It's a practice that needs to be managed.
Julia.
Yeah. And then Todd.
In terms of strategy, I would like to think that self-love is linked to purpose in life. I think once you've gone through the journey of knowing what your purpose is, which I think I've done, it kind of helps to manage how you can learn to love yourself more. And another thing we explored in the group is the influence of the community, or your impact on a community, and how that affects your own self-love. So let's say you're not accepted, but if you know who you truly are, then that self-love won't really die, I guess. And then another thing we explored in the group is there a difference between self-love and self-care? And people are talking a lot about maybe not eating a lot, or going for yoga, or exercise, and all those things. So that's more like on the care side. So is there a difference between self-love and self-care? So we did explore that as well. And it was something very technical that Anne said, something about self-care having to do more with the ego. So hopefully she can touch on that, because I can't really put it in my own words. And then we also explored a definition that we Googled. I'll put it in the chat now. So that's something else we explored in the group. But to answer your question, for me, self-love is to do with your purpose. So as long as you know what your purpose is and you are aligned to your purpose, and you know what you need to be doing when you're supposed to know, when you're supposed to be doing it, it will help with, you know, loving yourself despite external forces. That's my take on it.
Yeah, thank you. It's so interesting, that paradox of how the outside world treats you and how you feel inside, because the twos can be dearly beloved by the community that they're in and still feel no sense of self-love. And people can have a purpose, but be using that purpose to mitigate a lack of self-love. I'm okay because I'm going to deliver this into the world. And so there's this enormous complexity when we look at this stuff. So thank you for raising that, Alistair. Which Anne was it? I see Anne Gad. It was that Anne Hislop. And then we come to you, Todd. Thanks, Alistair, for that. Not you, or you?
Yeah, no, it was me. I guess we were just looking at, and to use the words Ingrid was using earlier, is around the toxicity and the shame on one side and the ego on the other, and how there's the piece around self-love that can swing in either direction. And the self-love around the ego is as unhealthy as the self-love around the shame, you know. And so it's that space between, and where there's something really authentic around it, and it's not dictated. It's not something which is, yeah. Anyway, Todd, I know you wanted to say something.
The 3 sevens in the group, I saw you'd been automatically assigned to each other. Just needed to get it in there. And
well, I'm you know, there's a theme here, and Alistair mentioned it. We talked about it, and you know, the self. So in the definition Alistair pulled, there was self-love as related to like action, and then Julia, you raised the idea of self-discipline, self-care. And I get so damn tired thinking like, God, I got to do another thing to love myself or feel good. And the most liberating talk I've ever heard in my life, the Mind in Life, or Dalai Lama's research organization, did this big project years ago in the US around like education. Like, what the hell are we trying to do with these kids anyway? And they started, and they said, well, they came to this idea of care. Care is what we're trying to teach. And it was not just self-care to care for others, self-care to care for others. They found that the starting point is receiving care was actually the kind of wellspring. And I think of that with self-love too. Like, can I put myself in a position to, like, there's a little doing, but it's to kind of just lay back and receive love, or be in awe of something, or feel like a love bigger than myself that kind of feeds that whole thing, because otherwise I can't keep it up. Honestly, it's too tiring if I'm always doing something as myself. So you know, that's kind of where I am a little bit on it.
I love that so much, for the reason you spoke about, and also for some of the conversations I had this weekend about children whose parents never loved them or said, I love you, or, you know, cared for them, and how difficult it is for them to receive love, not just from others, but from themselves. So that's pretty powerful, that first step, which is learn how to receive love. It's beautiful. I actually asked that question with a coaching client yesterday. I said, do you know how to receive love? and they couldn't answer. I mean, so is there anything pressing in this group, or can we explore this a little bit deeper? Okay, great. So why do we have such difficulty receiving love? Or do we?
Can I talk?
Yeah, rock and roll.
Have we not been brought up in a world where to give to oneself is perceived as being selfish? And so we've been schooled from a young age that, you know, the focus must be on giving outwards. And it's almost like punishable if you know, I was saying, there was a book that came out years ago, Ayn Rand, The Virtue of Selfishness.
Yes, yeah.
And, you know, I remember reading that as a young kid and thinking, wow, you know, for the first time, somebody's saying this is not necessarily a bad thing. But I think we were always brought up to, as I say, in a Western culture, to believe that anything you gave to yourself was somehow not particularly good. And I also want to make a point about even love itself. I see love as an umbrella term. I see it, as I said, like the word God. It's not one thing. It's so to different Enneagram types, it might be, so to a 9, it might be complete acceptance of self. To a 1, it might be having the discipline to do something, you know. So I see it as a broad term for a whole lot of practices. And the opposite side of that is the shame that's caused by the neurosis that we all have to a greater or lesser extent in different areas specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Anne. Does anybody want to comment on what Anne was talking about? Yeah, Sabine.
This actually linking what Anne just said to what you opened with, like how are there so many books about self-love very recently coming up, and why is this a theme now? And thinking about how we've raised and how our societies have been developing, the way I'm looking at it is that we, you know, many societies have been about survival and building welfare in the very recent history, and we're coming to a sort of platform where we have the luxury to even think about these kind of topics, such as self-love. But then thinking about stages of maybe collective consciousness. I don't know if this is taking it very far, but I think you do this kind of work with Aephoria as well, that perhaps from from survival to economic prosperity, and then now moving more individually inwards to self-love is just a kind of, I don't know, vibration place that we need to go into right now. And then from there, be able to, I don't know, connect more collectively again. This is sort of what I'm sensing here. That this is just the time for it. Yeah. To go inwards individually, do that kind of work, and then connect outwards again, and whether that's the wave that we're on.
Maybe COVID inspired. Oh my God, I have to live with myself in quarantine. How am I going to do this? I'll try self-love. Since homicide is not an option and suicide is a possibility, best I try self-love. I don't know. Or am I making light of it? I love the idea of going in and out, because that's how the maturational model works. For adult development, is you leave society, you work on yourself, and then you come back in again and you rejoin. So maybe it is exactly as you talk about. Thank you.
Julia, I'm still thinking about your question, why is it so difficult to receive love? And I'm wondering, there's two things that come to mind. The other one is a story, or a story, something I heard from a friend long ago. I didn't know if this is true. Some Native American tribe, maybe more of them, have part of the culture, because they're nomadic, some of them are nomadic, and they have very limited possessions. If you receive a gift, then you have to give something back, because you can't just collect stuff. There's no way for it to go. But when you've lived for a while and you get older, you end up with a set of treasured possessions which do exactly what you wanted to do. And receiving something becomes an imposition, because most likely what you're receiving is going to make things worse rather than better, because you're going to part with something that you really need or want. And I'm wondering, to the extent that we're used to sort of transactional interactions, if we're receiving love, if we're receiving something, including love, if we're not already sort of thinking, what am I going to have to pay back for this? Or what is this love going to cost me?
Yeah, yeah. And that's threatening, you know, like in the SCARF model, the David Rock model, autonomy is a neurological issue. You know, when that is threatened, it causes a lot of anxiety. So the receiving is anxiety provoking in that model. Yeah.
The other aspect is an engineering analogy. There's something called impedance matching. And we all have direct experience of this. If you drive a car, your gearbox is an impedance matching system. So there's the engine that has to connect to the wheels in some way. And depending on the speed of both, the energy is efficiently transferred or not. So, you know, your engine, you can give as much, push the accelerator down as hard as you want. If you're in the wrong gear, then that energy is just not transferred. And I wonder, similarly, this might be something that love language thing, that there's some ways that people can accept, some way that love can come in, that it can get traction, that it's meaningful to a person. And in other ways, it just sort of glances off. And in some way, this is just sort of pushing back the question one stage, because then you can ask why in some ways it works or doesn't. But I think there might be something of that it's maybe not as much a matter of not being prepared to accept love, not being able to accept love, but just for some reason not being able to manage a certain way that it's presented.
That's curious, you know, that presentation means so much.
Julia, what's coming up for me from what, I hope I pronounced it right, Rikus just said, something I learned on level 1 as a 7, and I was just reflecting back on my previous love relationships with Enya type 2s. It's like, I mean, they were very helpful, like, but I'm not the type of guy who go for a picnic with you, right? So she would do a favor for me, but it come at a cost of my freedom, my autonomy, going away for the whole weekend, stuck at a picnic. So, but before I didn't know the Enneagram, but I knew that this favor, I'm gonna have to pay for it. So I'm not willing to receive that love, even though I need it, you know? So you just say, I don't want it. I don't want the favor because I'm gonna have to pay with my autonomy, and my autonomy is more important. Yeah, that's what comes up for me there.
Maybe an example of self-love, to say no to the picnic.
No, it's saying no to the favor because I know on the weekend she'll want a picnic for a good Saturday, you know.
Hmm.
It's no to both.
Hmm. Do you think it works well with self-love or self-favors? If you know what I mean. I often do like trades. You can have 2 episodes of blah, blah, blah on Netflix if you XYZ. I don't know if that's a bad example.
You mean dealing with other people or with myself?
With yourself.
Yeah, so like today, there's something I wanted to do and I don't want to do it. So I promised to reward myself with something sweet. I don't know if that's what you're talking about in terms of trading something.
Thank you. So these are all sort of themes around why we have such difficulty accepting love. And I was kind of trying to get it to go, sorry, I've always got to have this connected and it belongs to you, Kate. So this idea of self-love and, you know, do we do it to ourselves, and what kind of trades do we make with ourselves? And, you know, one of my problems is, you know, I can do trades, but I can't just give freely. I can't just have a cake freely.
So Julia, what's so interesting about what you and Alistair are talking about leads me into thinking, so if we give ourselves self-love, whatever form that takes, acceptance, trades, ice creams, whatever it might be, if we give ourselves self-love, what are we afraid we're giving up? What autonomy does a piece of us lose if we receive love from ourselves? So what does it change in us if we accept loving ourselves?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Well, what flashed through my head, and you know how I like to dominate conversations, it's almost like you trade the love of yourself for the love of another, as if the love of another is more important. So the logic with that in my head is, if I say if I love myself by saying, no, Julia, you don't have to do that work now, then you potentially annoy someone else who might love you. So you'd rather keep their love than your love in some bizarre, perverse way. Does that make any sense?
That's interesting, because I think that for me is one level of it. But I've forgotten who was saying, was it Anne, around, who was it, that said something about when we open ourselves to a bigger love and that comes through us, then we don't have to effort the love. It just already, sorry, it was Todd here. And my sense of what does self-love mean, it's bigger than doing something for me or for someone else. It's an acceptance. It's a it's stepping into my wholeness and that being enough, rather than it being so the relationship with autonomy that is within me. What do I give up if I'm not allowing myself to love me regardless of the doing? And yet I think maybe the ebb and flow is linked sometimes to the doing or not doing of something. I don't know. Is that muddled?
No. It sounds like trying to manage that dialogue between self and other. We have to go in and out of both to maintain ourselves and keep connection at the same time.
And I think for me, self-love is possible even as we go in and out, but it's not always possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Shouldn't self-love be absolutely effortless? Because that's our natural state of being.
Yes.
So
Not
it
for me.
should be completely effortless. And yet everything we're talking about appears to be an effort to do this or that. So
Yeah.
in a way, we're working against ourselves. In other words, is it not about just allowing?
Yeah, but if I allow, then all I hear in my voice is nasty little voices with self-criticism. And I wonder if that's just the habit of my mind. It seems like I might have to make an effort to get into self-love.
Is it not then about letting go those voices, allowing those voices, and then just like allowing them to sift out of your system? In other words, not holding on to them, not giving them energy, accepting them.
I don't know. Anybody else want to comment on that before we hand over to Ingrid? Is it a natural and easy process to work through those voices?
I don't think it's easy. It's never been easy for me, but I think for me the journey of mindfulness and self-awareness is key. That voice that I'm not worthy of love and not lovable, this is from the two perspectives, that'll always be there. But the moment I catch myself is to say, okay, I don't have to believe this voice. And that has been to me the most liberating thing on my journey. This two personality type, that brain patterning according to that two pattern. I'm not lovable. I have to be kind and helpful and loving all the time in order to feel lovable. And only once everyone likes me and affirms me and agree with me, then I can love myself. So the moment I can catch that narrative, whenever I feel triggered, and I can, okay, I don't have to believe that. Actually, so I was with Kate and Eileen in a group, and Eileen, I think, actually used the phrase, from the one perspective, my scale is not reliable. And I think all of us, when we listen to the voice of our personality type and all those habitual patterns of thinking, when we listen to that, yes, it will take us quite often, not always, but most often, away from self-love. So so it's not easy, but it's definitely also not something that I do. It's literally catching myself in that and stepping away. I don't have to believe that. I don't have to believe that story. And in that, there's a, because the moment, and so I don't try to love myself. And for me, self-love is in that sense not a something that I have to do, but the allowing, deep acceptance. It's something I relax into. So it's not easy in a sense, but it's something I relax into. If I try to do self-love, I go into, very quickly I go into wanting people to like me and agree with me and accept me, and into the pattern that actually takes me away from experiencing self-love.
Beautiful. Thank you. Any more comments related to that? So it could be being or it could be doing. And maybe I had to really do something very hard yesterday with myself to try and pull myself back to self-love. I had to take myself off and give myself a lecture about, I just moved house. It's a mess. People were coming. I went into a panic. I started cleaning up the house and moving furniture. I had to manage myself really well because I could have just completely overworked myself all through the night. I had to do something to stop myself. I had to let myself be and be okay with being in a mess. For me, I have to do things. And I would love to be being. Maybe it's both.
And what I also hear from everyone is, in some sense, to be open for an alternative narrative, because there's this, we all have our own narrative that, so whatever self-love is to you, we all have a narrative that takes us away from that, and to be open to, okay, you know, what alternative narrative is there, and what might be useful to me now.
Yeah. And I think that's a critical point, because if you look at this group, there's quite a lot of post-conventional thinking going on here. So you guys have moved away from the idea of one truth. So your capacity to find another narrative is easier than if you were stuck in this idea that there is one truth in the world. They won't love me if my house looks like a mess.
Would you like to share with us how you got away from that, how you stepped into a different narrative?
I said to myself, you've been working for 3 days. You've worked incredibly hard. Now stop this, Julia. You've done your best. You've done your absolute best. You're exhausted. You're staggering around like an old person because you've lifted up boxes that were too heavy for you. Look at you. Look at you. Now get yourself onto the couch and go and get a gin and tonic. That's how I had to deal with it. Because I'm Enneagram 8, the words are always harsh. But I tried a few gentle words after that, and it seemed to feel quite nice for me. And then it all came up again when the people arrived, and I started shuffling stuff, and I had to do it all over again. There's this constant lack of support for myself that is just exhausting. I have to keep doing stuff in order to be palatable to me, to not have anxiety. It's so boring and repetitive. So I'd love to be able to catch it while it's still small.
Julia?
Is it related, or is it a different subject?
I guess everything is related, if we want to make it related.
Cunning, Alistair. It's a cunning move to get in before Ingrid. I know you.
I think she'll have something to say about this, but my report came out with this super, super high self-preservation. And I was sharing in the group that I don't struggle with self-love. And linking that to what Anne just said, you just be like, I don't need to make an effort to love myself. Unlike some people, I just do, which will show up in some relationships as if I'm being selfish. And I've been quite, you know, loving the Enneagram theory around it to say it's not selfishness. I've just got a high self-praise. So I'm keen to know, is there like maybe research around?
No, run a survey on this group.
Okay, I think. Because my hypothesis is self-praise people don't really struggle as much as other people with self-love.
Okay. Self-praise, put up your hand.
Excuse me?
Okay, there you go. And self-praise, who else? Rickus, are you self-praise? No. Okay. Your sample group's quite small, Alistair.
I'm 50-50 between self-praise and social, so I'll stick my hand up.
Okay. And it's all sevens, hey? You're all sevens.
I need to jump in.
Yeah.
I need to make an urgent Enneagram intervention.
Do it.
That is totally not true. Self-praise people can just be self-annihilating in a different way, self-brutalizing. And self-praise just means a absolute distortion in the area of physical safety. So it can take the form, if it's a dominant instinct, of addiction, self-neglect, eating disorders, over-exercising. So that can be a self-praise dominant. Like self-praise force can self-neglect to a dangerous degree, and does a self-praise 7, which can be very Epicurean and reckless. That's not self-love. So I think just in terms of Enneagram, no, not true. So,
what of a healthy self-praise, whatever number it is? Would they not be like self-aware of who they are and know where they need to be when they need to be where they need to be?
That would apply to all the subtypes. If you've cultivated a deep sense of self-worth, no matter what your subtype is, you'll be attuned to your own needs and to caring for your own experience, which I think is much more the definition of self-love. Is actually, it's not about self-preservation needs and attending to them necessarily. That's just one tiny aspect of self-love, is actually being able to tune into one's body. It's much more than that.
There are quite a few definitions that relate to that idea that you're caring for your experience on this earth.
And if you look at someone like Gabor Mate, he speaks about attachment versus authenticity. And authenticity is when you're able to relate from your living experience and be in contact with yourself and your needs and your preferences and your sense of what's arising in the moment. So you spoke earlier about that tension between attachment and maintaining love and being true to what's happening in yourself. But I don't see it as necessarily translating into like, I'm going to go and get my nails done or any particular behavior. You know what I mean? It's a kind of state of being in which one is able to be self-merciful, self-compassionate, and non-identified with this punitive, self-brutalizing, self-annihilating superego. So that's the Enneagram perspective on it. Is step one in the Enneagram journey, according to Sandra Maitri and others, is to disidentify with the superego and be able to pull back into the state of the inner observer, which is innately very patient, compassionate, non-attached. That's all the virtues: equanimity, serenity. So, you know, that would be the natural state from an Enneagram perspective, like an essential state.
Yeah, I mean, that would, so to find self-love, what you have to do is just go into observer.
To a stable inner observer that has a compassionate curiosity about your experience in the moment. So you don't have to love anything about yourself at all. You have a completely neutral attitude to everything about yourself, whether it's, you know, wonderful and people are affirming it, or whether it's a dark shadow element that you're trying to take responsibility for and, you know, adapt. But from the perspective of the inner observer, there's enough equanimity to hold it all, and to not then self-attack and not to attack any of one's own inner parts. That there's space for all of them, and appreciating that this journey of unfolding and coming to awareness of these sometimes very tormented inner parts that act out, that bringing them home into the kind of light of compassionate awareness is what self-love is. I mean, that's Almas. I'm not giving you a guru spiel here. I'm telling you Almas and Maitri and those people.
It's very useful. What do people, thank you. What do other people think? Is that a path you could work with?
I think I absolutely agree. I think that Almas's work around that and having the inner observer and cultivating that is aligned to self-love. You know, because certainly for me, I find I can see myself sometimes going down those rabbit holes. And on the days when I can see that I'm going down, then laughter is just so much more readily available to myself about myself. You know, so even if I can't turn myself around and take myself out of my little hole I've got in, the fact that I can see myself in it is, as you're saying, Ingrid, you can see it with compassion. You know, you kind of go, oh, yeah, no, there we go. It's just going to take some time. So it's not it's not always that it's going to prevent the ebb and the flow, for me anyway, but that self-observer is massively important to cultivate. And that's not, I think that's the first step. It's not having to do, it's just noticing, which is easier for me than the doing part.
Nice. So we've got some options around here. It's being, doing, and noticing. Yeah. Pete, do you want to talk about self-acceptance? Acceptance. I see you've made a comment. Thanks for that.
Not particularly. That's why I put it in the chat box. It just came up when both Ingrid and not sure, somebody, Sarah, I think it was were talking, that I got this feeling of possibly using self-acceptance as a synonym for self-love, which can take away some of the icky sticky connotations that might pull people in to certain preconceptions, I guess. And it's just that surrender and acceptance of I am what I am, and it's okay. Whether it's good, bad, indifferent, I can accept it.
Pete, I'm wondering if our capacity to do that varies according to our maturity or life experience.
Well, what comes up for me, and I'm feeling almost sort of intuitively, is I think the scope of self-acceptance broadens with the maturity. If I look at someone who's conforming, they may be very self-accepting, but it's a very narrow part of it with a lot more blind spots. And the other parts get pushed away or deflected, ignored, or consciously rejected. And I'm sensing as one moves up the maturity, it's just a broader and broader scope of self-acceptance that we allow ourselves. I'm not sure allow is the right word, but it's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah, and it's good and bad stuff.
Yeah, it's, I can accept everything. I can accept that I'm tired and I moved enough heavy boxes and the place is still a mess and I need a gin and tonic. I can accept that, and it's fine for right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting, because I was also wondering about people at much earlier stages of development and whether you think they're aware of not accepting or loving themselves. I'm wondering what the awareness thing is in relation to this.
Well, to me, it's the breadth of self-acceptance.
You've got the breadth. Okay, so it's just so there is some awareness, but it's very tiny at the beginning.
And selective.
Tiny and selective. I suppose it might also be determined by the stage. So conforming, it would be related to conforming type issues. The bits that would be included or excluded. Okay. Has anybody got anything to say? Because I'd love to send you off on a mission, another mission. You cool? Ingrid, do you want to talk about this?
I just put something in the chat that's a kind of combination of the Jungian Donald Kalshed, who speaks about indwelling in ourselves. And with trauma, we don't come to live inside the self because it's too dangerous. So the shame is actually a protective mechanism, and the self-hatred is a protective mechanism to keep us out of our experience. So if we understand self-hatred as actually it's a protector in IFS, in the inner parts work. You always understand that that part is playing a role to protect us from getting hurt. It's just an outdated part. It thinks that we're 5 years old. It doesn't realize that it doesn't need to do that anymore. So when we start healing the shame, we're able to come and live in our experience with that compassionate self-inquiry. And that's Almasa's whole thing, that we don't just use mindfulness, which is a quality of attention. We bring a kind of caring quality to our attention to what's arising in us. It's a kind of loving, caring attention to our own experience. So I just wanted to put that in as a nice kind of integration of some of the ideas that I've discovered.
I like that enormously. Tessie.
Thank you, Ingrid. I think something has been going through my mind. I mean, based on what everybody said, and also Julia, what you said, you know, about allowing yourself to be loved. And for me, it's got to do a lot with control. So as a two, you know, when I love you, I can control you. But if I allow you to love me, you're controlling me. So that belief that I'm unlovable is exactly what Ingrid says. You know, it justifies why I'm not allowing you to love me. Because if I do that, then you're in control of me. I'm no longer in control of you. So that for me is I was often, you know, I often wonder why do I struggle with self-love? And I think that for me is realizing that I think it's a control issue. Although I never see myself as controlling, but I think it's a control issue. Because I can control you if I love you.
That's a great insight. Really beautiful. And, you know, there's a new workshop for you, Ingrid, looking at different versions of self-love through that particular Enneagram lens. And even Scarf puts you in there. I'd love to do like a quick survey type thing. And then we can kind of see how that goes. Would that be okay? So everybody who has had difficulty with self-love and self-acceptance, put up your hands. There's Alistair giving a wave. Okay. Great, so that's basically everyone. Okay. This is a very difficult question I'm going to ask because it really puts you on the spot and I don't want to be hurtful. So if you don't want to answer, you must give the flat arm. Okay. Who has experienced a sense of shame about themselves? Okay. It's just an interesting thing. Who here feels good enough most of the time? Look at this. It is just so damn fascinating. You know, what is it about humans that we must go around with this stuff? I find it very normalizing for coaching clients to hear stuff like it's normal, and everyone experiences it, and no one, I mean, I say this, but I clearly am wrong. No one feels good about themselves all the time. And I'm not sure I've even met a person with a secure attachment yet, despite them saying in the theory that 50% of people have secure attachments. I don't know if it's the type of people I'm meeting or what it is. But isn't this a curious thing? Cool. I just wanted to check my data. So maybe we can go into groups again, and I'll put you in new groups. And my question, and you can adapt it as you want. It's self-love is such a woolly term, and it's difficult to bring into corporates in a way that kind of makes sense for specializing group, technical group. So I would like you to go away for 10 minutes. I'll see how you go, and have a discussion about the language around self-love that you use in a corporate that would make sense. And then if you manage to get the language waxed, think through how you would work with this in coaching. And just come back with some tips that you can share around this. Are you cool with that? All right, so I'm just gonna move people around. You know, I think that there's such a problem with this self-love thing and selling it into corporates because people think it's so wishy-washy. All right, see you in 10, 15 minutes. I'll pop in and see how you're doing. And you can also process this conversation from before. Oh, no. Close all rooms. Sorry, I don't know why it's put everyone back. I'm going to recreate. The sevens keep trying to go off with each other. All right, goodbye. I don't care. It's welcome back. I think it's about how do you want to use your time. So, did you have any answers to language and how to use this in coaching? Yeah, Sabine.
I was in a group together with Renier. Do I pronounce that correctly? And I feel like we designed a beautiful workshop for a corporate organization who wants to hire us. And I think we pieced together a few ideas, and Renier, please add on if I'm missing something. But I really liked how Renier had a great idea around starting with normalizing what we were just talking about altogether, about normalizing, you know, just kind of checking in with where everyone is. You know, it's normal to not feel good enough all the time. And a lot of people are carrying shame around all day long. And how that kind of, you know, opens up this shared vulnerability and hopefully connection if you were to be with a group in a room. And then from there, hopefully from collective acceptance, shifting to the ability to accept yourself, like, okay, I'm not the only one. And then we had a little bit of a discussion around, well, we had some words that use entry points such as well-being, mental health, stress management, work-life balance, boundaries, self-acceptance was already mentioned before, but to use that as very practical ways that can involve actions and practices that could be better digestible. And then how you can use the Enneagram in teams, as probably many of you have already done, but to highlight, you know, the importance of difference and how people are different and how you can embrace the difference between people and how that can lead to, you know, self-acceptance and self-love.
Would you use the term self-love?
We haven't really, I think, concluded on that, but we were trying to find ways, like, if you can't, what do you do? So I think we were just mainly looking at not using it. Just thinking from the top of my mind, if I would use it, I would probably build up to it, not open with it.
Right.
So see whether those other words are even landing at all. And if they're not, like, let's not try self-love, because you'll probably be ejected from that space.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tricky. Love is a difficult word in corporate.
Yeah.
Did you, one thing we didn't talk about, and I just made some notes here about, is some people think self-shaming or self-criticism is a way to avoid not being good enough. So if I stop criticizing myself, then I'm going to become bad and lose my job. How would you work with that idea? Because that's very much a kind of a specializing idea that it keeps me in the game. Lack of self-love keeps me in the game. Yeah, Rikus, you got.
The first thing I thought of was a language trick, which I still like, although after the discussion it seems perhaps less useful. But specifically for specializing and performing, I think talking about self-maintenance is useful.
Huh? I quite like that. Self-maintenance. It's like you're an engine, you're a computer, and you have to maintain. Love it. It's a nice mechanical metaphor.
To achieve optimal performance.
Self-maintenance for optimal performance. Voorsprong deur techniek. For those that know that, yeah. I shouldn't laugh and be silly like this, but I like that. It's a nice metaphor.
I think at the end, technical language is the best for the corporate space. It's just so accessible. Although from a critical point of view, you can't define any human, to those technical language. But in terms of what is needed, it is probably the best way of addressing it.
Yeah, very unemotional. Yeah, there's no lovey stuff there. There's no hippie stuff. Not a crystal inside.
I think you need to just add an evidence-based approach to self-maintenance for optimal performance. And then I think we're all millionaires in this room. We can all join together and tour the world.
Yes, exactly. That is so right. We are naughty people. But I think that's the truth. This brilliant science, machinery, an evidence-based approach to self-maintenance for optimal performance. Yeah. Anyone else want to comment? Talk about that.
I don't want to really talk about that.
Oh, sorry.
Anne, Rikus.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to say what the Enneagram to me is a paradox. Everything in it is a paradox. So we can't focus on self-love because on the other side here, we're sitting with shame. So isn't it just about sitting with shame and love on a daily basis and actually just learning to transcend the need for either? Because they're opposite sides of the same wounding in a way.
Yeah, and I think that language would work really well with post-conventional people. And that's what would get them in, because that is an accurate description of reality. But corporates who want to toolbox stuff might go.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I'm not a corporate, we know that. So yeah.
No, I know that, and you're very post-conventional. I love that, working with the paradox to transcend.
But I think that's even included with the self-maintenance metaphor, because it actually incorporates the paying attention in a non-judgmental way. I'm driving with the car this or that broke, or the light bulb went out. Okay, this happened. Okay, what do we need to do now? Okay, we need to replace this or that. So it actually opens the space to embrace all sides. It embraces the performance of the machine. It also embraces the weaknesses of the machine, and you have to compensate for the weaknesses of the machine, and you have to give the maintenance it needs. So you can actually bring in all the paradox and loving kindness, unconditional acceptance to this performing machine.
Yeah, like don't ride the gear pads, the brake pads down to the end. Replace way before.
Oh.
I'm loving this machine metaphor. I know on MBAs, which often are like more achiever sort of level, it's often called self-care. But self-maintenance is perfect.
That was the one caveat. I do think this is more, if we're talking about self-care, I think this works well. Self-acceptance, even though Rainier made that sound like that could perhaps work, but self-love and self-acceptance is maybe more tricky. And Anne and Tessie pointed out when we were talking that in some environments, when it's possible for the self-maintenance to become abusive again. And we were thinking that perhaps something like self-acceptance is just not accessible before a certain level of maturity.
Yeah. Yeah. And what is that level of maturity?
Probably transitioning from performing to internalizing.
Yeah, cool. All about what people can digest.
Julia.
Any other comments that are waiting to be heard before we finish?
Yeah. For me, I think corporates really are interested in productivity. So the best effort I can make right now to link the self-love to productivity is, which obviously eventually hits the bottom line, is with no self-love, it means you're in conflict with yourself, which impacts how you show up in a team. That's more conflict, inefficiencies, etc. Then that impacts your productivity as a team and as a business. So if you can, I don't know, find a way to word that in a better way, that could work.
Yeah, link self-care or self-maintenance to productivity. Nice, thank you. Rainier.
No, I think it's important for all of us to just keep in mind that any word, or no matter how much our own awareness, in any insight can be hijacked by the ego. So, oh yes, I have to be more disciplined with loving myself unconditionally in a deep way. The next moment, my ego has more ammunition to judge myself with. So so on the one hand, just to have that awareness to, okay, any moment can be hijacked. So in terms of the corporate, yes, will words and concepts be hijacked in the wrong way? Always. But to still trust that in the bigger scheme of things, more good is being done. And I think maybe the greatest, what comes out from this conversation with me is that self-love really goes linked to self-awareness. It's only to the extent you're self-aware can you accept yourself unconditionally. And maybe that's the greatest gift that we can give any manager or employee, is to help them with that self-awareness.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's a great first step, is the self-awareness. Yeah.
Julia, too, I mean, I'm knee deep in the world of sales and marketing right now. And, as much as I can, I try to rely on the organization to tell me, like, to use their own language for what they see the challenges are and what their aspirations are, and which is often revealing of stages, but also just helps me kind of understand what might connect and if there could be a connection there. And so learning from individual clients, learning from trends across, and then not. I've spent many years banging my head against the wall, coming up with language, and sometimes spent many weeks coming up with language, and then having it not land, and they just say it back to me. I'm like, why don't I just start there from now? So, yeah.
That's good. Go to the source. Find out how they want to be. Yeah, nice. Excellent. Thank you. Any last comments? So it's a bit of a woolly subject, and I wanted to try and find a way to make it more gritty and more applicable to corporate. And I think we've found some good hooks that can go into a corporate world, but can also have meaning in a more post-conventional kind of spiritual almost type world. And I suppose, that some of the things that I'm taking away is this sort of dual response around self-love, which involves being, doing, and noticing. And using that as a kind of a framework to working with this. And I really am deeply enamored by the idea of an evidence-based self-maintenance program for optimal performance. And I should be forever grateful of that. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And I look forward to seeing you again, and lots of love. I'm going to unpack boxes.
Oh. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Julia.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. See you later. Alice. Oh.